So recently Netflix has a show on it. It's a Sin. And I started watching it. And it's actually about the homosexual population in the UK in the 1980s at the outbreak of the HIV virus. I grew up in Manhattan and Long Island, where I saw these things happening, right? The outbreak of HIV, and knew quite a lot of people with it during that time when I was young. So this show really touched me. In addition to that, on the diploma course, we just had teaching on the immune system. And so I decided to look more deeply into the value of yoga for people living with HIV. So it's such a different diagnosis now than it was in the 1980s, although the stigmatization around it is still really high, and I find that deeply tragic. But I'm interested personally in how yoga can support people with HIV. And as I've looked at the evidence base, because this isn't the first time, in the past, what we primarily see is it's reducing depression and anxiety and improving overall quality of life. But there hasn't been any indicators of increasing immune markers, specifically like the T4 cells that we know are implicated in reduced immunity in HIV. So I did more of a deep dive this week, and I found a really interesting paper published by Ramirez-Garcia looking at, it's an overall systematic scoping review of HIV and looking at mind-body practices. And in it, what it says really intriguingly is that the research showing improvement in immune markers needed to include more than one thing in the intervention. So yoga on its own wasn't necessarily helpful. But when yoga included specifically relaxation practices, mindfulness and meditation, there was a change in immunological markers, which is really exciting. It suggests greater overall health. Now, yoga therapy, right, and yoga in general, but yoga therapy specifically is looking at much more than just asana and breathing. We're looking at lifestyle change. So I want to highlight to all the yoga therapists out there that using multifactorial approaches for people with HIV may be supportive. I don't want to promise, but may be supportive in actually improving immune health. So vital, because even though people with HIV are living much longer and it's now considered a chronic condition, there is earlier mortality for people with HIV than for people that don't have it. So really think about, okay, how can I engage in teaching a yoga nidra, a gentle asana, right? Be very cautious around things having to do with the hips, because the medications that are used, the retrovirals over time can cause some atrophy in the bone around the hips, so be very gentle around that. But consider a multidimensional, gentle practice. And also remember, because I've spoken about this in another video, that when you increase parasympathetic response by doing calming practices, you release acetylcholine, and acetylcholine reduces inflammatory markers, and that may be part of the reason that the immune system is spurred to improve the production of immune cells, although sometimes inflammation also enhances the production of immune cells. It's a complicated pathway. I hope I've gotten you interested in this, even though we don't talk about HIV as much as we did like in the 80s when there was an outbreak, and now, you know, it's COVID, and other conditions. There's so many people living with it, and they need our love and support, just like people with lots of other health conditions. And I think yoga therapy can really offer that, both in the psychological and physiological realm. Thanks, everyone.